For those of you that don't know, Ravnica is a world in the popular game Magic the Gathering. The premise of this world is that it is one giant, never-ending city. There are no natural biomes, no forests, no swamps, no prairies, no mountain ranges, and no coastline. Even if you're not acquainted with the game, you're probably already thinking, how is this even possible? And if you do play the game, you'll know that the ecuminopolis, or Planet City scenario, is only the tip of the paradoxical iceberg that is Ravnica. But let's stick to the basic question. Could Ravnica function as a ecuminopolis? The answer is yes, of course, otherwise I wouldn't be making this video. For those of you that don't know, or don't remember, let me explain the setting itself. Ravnica may be a city everywhere, but the 10th district is where 80% of the stories occur. And the other 9 districts is where the other 19% of the stories occur. Everywhere else is only mentioned in passing, an unidentified location, or merely a rumor. As a matter of fact, it is stated more that no one knows where Ravnica ends than what is going on outside of the districts, despite the fact that Ravnica is known to have suburbs with their own identities. Inside the 10th district, 10 guilds squabble for power with each other constantly. There are a lot of people that are not in these guilds, but the guilds still run the world, or as far as we know. Again, the details are not specific outside of the 10 districts, only that the guilds have less influence. Now, before I get into the details of this, and depending on when this video is released, Ravnica may have changed, but I'm sticking to all the information that has happened prior to the Guilds of Ravnica playset. In order to see if the city world of Ravnica is possible, we'll need to put it out of the fantasy and connect it to our world. Since there's so little information about the other regions, let's stick with defining the districts and just make assumptions about Ravnica at large. From the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, which I will be calling simply the Guide from here on out, has a map of the 10th district. In it, there's a scale that basically defines the 10th as roughly 6 to 8 miles across. When applying simple math, we can see that all 10 districts make up about 125 square miles, which makes it a medium-sized city by modern Earth standards. For comparison, the city of Denver is a little bigger at 155 square miles. However, if I am going to compare the real-life city to Ravnica, I would pick Budapest. The aesthetics and culture is based on Eastern European styles. The history of Budapest and Ravnica both include the unification of local towns. The climates are similar. Both were built on previous settlements of lost cultures, both have their fair share of conflicts, and while obviously Budapest does not cover the earth, it had a massive population boom for over 100 years. So we have the place, but we need to have a time period to connect the setting. Magic is a swords and sorcery fantasy game, so one would assume that it takes place roughly in the Dark Ages. However, Ravnica is way more advanced than that. It has electricity, and not just Tesla coils, but the guide states that businesses, streetlights, and a lot of homes are hooked up to the grid. A Ravnican can order a cup of coffee from a coffee shop and get a newspaper while they're there. There's plenty of other amenities we would recognize too, like household plumbing. They have a subway system, they have power plants, they have elevators, and they have what we could call cars. The book calls them magic-propelled carriages, though. All in all, I would think this would set Ravnica on par with a later time period. So looking at Budapest, it became electrified in the mid-1800s while getting its subway in 1896. So I think we can ground Ravnica and tie all of its unknown information to 1900 Budapest. Hold on, why are we grounding this magical world in real life? Shouldn't the magic just be able to solve all the problems? You may say that. The whole world is run by wizards, so all the problems can be solved by magic. Checkmate, next video. Then I'll say, wait, sure everything's magic, but Ravnica's magic follows strict rules that can't just be deus ex machina away. As a matter of fact, the magic is pretty practical in its organization. Think of the phrase, advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So from my research into the book and several of the stories, Ravnica's magic can be roughly separated into 3 groups. Compulsory magic, power, and biological manipulation. Only the power and biological magic is relevant to the video, so I'll not dwell on the compulsory one. It deals with memories and mind control, so let me know in the comments if you're interested in hearing how Ravnica keeps itself ordered. Let's start with the power magic. It's a force that, when applied, can create energy, momentum, force, or power. Don't think of this magic as a spell or an enchantment. Think of it as like oil. Oil in our world in its various forms make our vehicles move, power our homes, cook our food, and light our streets. That's what the power magic does for the people of Ravnica. The Izzet Guild, among other things, creates the infrastructure of the city. They set up the lighting, electricity in the buildings, the subway system, and the hydroelectric power plants. All of this and more is either influenced or directly powered by that magic. But it does have its limitations, for the Izzet store their power in batteries and they're constantly researching how to harness more of it all at once, or how to harness it more efficiently. The biological magic can be interpreted as a really fast gene editing tool. It changes people, plants, and animals into creatures of the wizard's desire. The Simic is a guild directly involved with biological manipulation, but the fungus of the Golgari farms and the leader of the tree huggers of Selesnya also seem to utilize this power. Its application is a little more abstract than the power magic, but the people of Ravnica make things healthier, stronger, and can bring things back from the dead by using this magic. Like in the real world, I'm sure this magic has been used to modify plants and fungi to have better taste and nutrition. So now that the magic situation is settled, let's start putting some numbers to see if this ecuminopolis thing can work. The population of Budapest in 1900 was 703,000. The 10 districts came out to being about half the size of Budapest, and there's large areas of low-occupied land called rubble belts, so it should be smaller. But it is very well known that thousands of beings live underneath the city. However, some kind of bend the rules on being alive. With all my research, I never got a solid answer of how many people actually live in the Undercity. The best I got is thousands, so we'll say in our defined part of Ravnica, there's 450,000 living in the city and another 50,000 living below. So how are 500,000 people going to eat without any farmlands? The average person needs roughly 0.5 acres in farmland to live if they're a vegetarian, and 1.5 if they eat meat at least once a day. Back in 1900, only the wealthy or professional class could get a hold of meat, and only the nobility could eat as much as an American does today. The Ravnican diet is not described for the average person, so I'll go with 0.6 acres per person. This maintains the meager standards that most Eastern Europeans dealt with, while accounting for the luxuries like meat and coffee that are described in the guide. Now let's talk about the Golgari rot farms. The Ravnican diet is described for being the impoverished, and for the people that live under the city, whom also typically live in squalor. They eat fungus that is harvested off the dead bodies that end up underground, and while a few sources conflict, most state that the fungus, or variety of fungi, is enough to sustain the average person. This contradicts how fungus and mushrooms are consumed in the real world, which, while has nutrients, typically lacks enough calories to properly sustain people. So let's think of this mushroom as something like a potato. How much land is needed to feed all the 10 districts? Just under 50 square miles or 150 square kilometers. Okay, so if the underground had the same amount of space as above ground for crops, the Golgari could easily feed everyone. That wouldn't make any sense. Fungus need moisture and fertilizer, which shouldn't be available from every single nook and cranny underground. Unfortunately, the underground is not mapped out, and all we get for a sense of scale is that it's extensive. So we're going to have to make some assumptions. So looking at the map, above ground, the Golgari only have access for corpse disposal in one precinct. I would assume that there are other disposal points, but they aren't mentioned. The only thing I do have is that the Golgari operate in every district, and that bodies occasionally end up wherever there is a gap in the city above. So let's give a conservative estimate and assume that the only arable land is only around large carcass depositories and the gaps between neighborhoods. The equivalent of 10% of the city for the depositories, and we'll give another 10% for the gaps, since they seem to be everywhere in the 10th district. That gives us 25 square miles, or 16,000 acres, which can feed over 26,666 residents, or a little over half the population. Hold on, again, there's another guild that deals in food, the Celestia Guild. There are multiple sources in the guide that states they have many farms and are another huge contributor to food. Hold on again. Farmland? Isn't this whole place supposed to be just one ginormous city? Well, sort of. This is the most conflicting thing about Ravnica. What is the actual population density of the entire world? It must vary quite a bit because the Gruul do control abandoned regions called rubble belts that contain small tribes and wild animals, and the Selesnya own regions called green belts that hold farms and gardens. But on the flip side, so many sources refer to Ravnica as a never-ending city. So I think I know what's going on here. Many of you live in what everyone would consider a city, while some of you would live in a less dense place many would call a suburb or town, but on official documents your municipality may still be called a city. While everyone calls it a never-ending city, there could be miles of land without buildings between centers of development. Allow me to quote the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, which was written by the owners of Magic the Gathering. The guildless are especially common in areas that might be considered rural, places farther from the heart of the city and the larger exurban areas. So there, even though Wizards of the Coast contradicts themselves about Ravnican details, this is deliberate and irrefutable. Alright, so I discussed the missing open land. Let's get back to finding out if Celestia can feed the rest of the people. So the 10th district doesn't seem to have much space dedicated to it, and the other districts are not detailed enough to inform us about arable land, so we're going to have to make some assumptions. Going off the 10th district map, Celestia controls about 20% of it, and I will assume Celestia occupies roughly the same for the other ones minus the 9th, for which I looked at the other districts and only the 9th has specific information about who occupies it. Although the guide states that each guild does have presence in every district, so 20% of the other 8 districts means that Celestia has about 20 square miles of farmland, or 12,800 acres, which could feed another 21,333 people, or a little under half. Together we can feed 48,000 of our estimated population of 50,000. Oof. So unless Celestia and Golgari have super huge farms that are never mentioned, they don't seem to be able to feed everyone. Hold on again. Before you say, "Ha! The 2 food guilds can't feed everyone, so Ravnica can't exist," I'll say, those are only 2 guilds. You don't think that the super wealthy Orzhov guild doesn't have some plantations? It's stated that they own at least vineyards. And the Simic have access to a giant unused ocean to feed their members. You don't think they don't know how to fish? And should I even mention the Gruul tribes with their disdain for domestic operations like farming? Surely their people would live off whatever they foraged and hunted in the rubble belts. I think I've answered the food problem, but if those 2,000 unaccounted for people still bother you, there's one more group that are confirmed to be farmers on Ravnica, the Guildless. I've mentioned them a few times now, but I'm going to lay it all out. They make up half of Ravnica and occupy every position that other guilds don't already do, like cartographers, professors, and bartenders, while others can compete with industries the guilds already occupy, like mercenary groups, banking, and criminal activity. This includes farming. Sources are light on the guildless people who don't do dramatic things like crime or fighting, but it is mentioned they farm, and no guild, even the Golgari, state to have a monopoly on food. Also, cards will occasionally state that there are an abundance of rooftop gardens that the average citizen uses. So there, I'm pretty sure that observing the details of Ravnica and finding a real-world equivalent to fill in the blanks, you can see that Ravnica, the city world, is quite possible. There's enough food and infrastructure to take care of everyone, and if you want me to figure out more of Ravnica's contradictions and secrets, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe.